Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. We're coming up on the end of the Didius Falco series. I mean, we're not quite there yet. There's a book, or maybe two, but at least one more book after this one. But here we are, Alexandria. And Alexandria is the story of Marcus Didius Falco is trying to go on vacation with his pregnant wife, and the universe just hates him for it. So, unlike many of his other trips in the course of this series, because most of his trips have been driven by, in effect, work. That he went to Britain to find out what happened to missing ingots of precious metals. He went to Spain to find out what was happening with this, that, or the other one. Went back to Britain again for work, wandered out through the Middle East for work, trekked to other parts of Italy for work. But this time, they trek out to Egypt because his common-law wife, Helena, wants to see the pyramids. And she's pregnant, and it's going to be their third child. And the thing is, once you have 3 children, all of whom are under 10, one of whom is still a toddler, and you're about to have a newborn, and it's a lot, you're probably not going to be able to just go trundling all over hither, thither, and yon. Especially because, well, they're not a wealthy family. Yes, she is from an upper class family, but the fact is that their family is not particularly wealthy, at least not in the way that, the truly wealthy would deem it. Falco has sort of edged his way up into the middle class, but even then they are basically middle class. Or rather, he's middle class. He's now an equestrian officially, but also economically he's middle class. Because you could be a plebeian and be economically middle class from our modern perspective. But the point is, either way, they don't have infinite funds. They don't have massive amounts of money to pay for stuff. And on top of which, they have the girl that they picked up, who is now a teenager, that they picked up when they were in Britain that second time, who came back with them, who kind of acts like a nanny and kind of acts like a ward. She's sort of in between, but she's officially part of the family now, because they took her with them, since nobody quite knew, but they are assuming that what she was the child of Romans who got killed in the Boadicean rebellion. Which, was real ugly from the Roman perspective. But anyways, so the point is that he's got a lot going on, and when you add another new baby, another new child to the household, it's just going to get to be too much because they don't have the funds to pay for, 3 nannies to keep track of all of the children and so on. They're mostly raising the kids themselves. They can't afford to keep slaves because this is ancient Roman, people have slaves. And I will reiterate again that slaves in ancient Rome, while certainly many of them would have been treated extremely poorly. The fact is that the way it's described here, and, I can't speak to the 100% certainty of Lindsey Davis's scholarship on the matter, but it is implied here, again, that slaves, at least slaves that are household slaves, are meant to be seen as part of the family. It's one of the reasons why it's considered a standard thing to free slaves upon an owner's death, so that they can go and have their own lives and so on and so forth. You are enslaved, you don't have choices, but this is not the black slavery of the Deep South. Obviously slaves can be victim and probably were frequently victim to abuses, but on general principles, the only slaves that were supposed to be actually put through horrific abuses were those who were prisoners of war and criminals. And while I grant those aren't the same thing, and we have various Geneva Conventions and things about treatment of prisoners of war for a reason, it is understandable for somebody to say, We don't want prisoners of war to be happy and healthy and able to escape back to their side and, restart a war against us. That's a completely understandable and viable practical move, however inhumane one might see it. Anyway, so Falco has slaves now who, in the last book, the biggest thing that he kept noticing about them was that they just kept sitting there and playing board games and ignoring him, and he's like, I don't know what to do about this. Because the thing was that he spent some time, admittedly, quote-unquote, pretending, but he was effectively, in all practical terms, a mining slave with a bunch of criminals and POWs and so on for a good couple months in the first book. He knows exactly how dehumanizing this can be and is extremely aware of the humanity of anybody who is officially a slave. And when you look at slaves in this series, I don't want to overemphasize the way in which they're treated. I just want to be clear that you need to draw a distinction between that and Black American slavery, because they really do seem to have been fundamentally different concepts at core. I mean, yes, okay, the concept at core is free labor, that you only have to pay them in food and somewhere for them to sleep, but nonetheless. So, anyways, the point is that this is sort of supposed to be kind of a last hurrah, and because Helena is deeply intellectual and loves reading and loves knowing stuff, that, going to see this important piece of history, one of the 7 wonders of the world, something that's maybe not entirely a bucket list for them, but, is a bit of a thing. It's something that she really, really wants to see, because, it's the pyramids. They're a wonder of the world. So they make their way out there, and, she starts spending a large amount of time, because there are 2 libraries in Alexandria. You have the great Library of Alexandria, the one that got destroyed, and everything in it was just wrecked, and it was a horrific tragedy for the literature of the period, because, of course, that was a library in which there was reputedly supposed to be every single book ever written. Now, obviously, there wasn't, but anything that has the reputation of every single book ever written is going to have some really, really weird, off-kilter stuff that nobody will have heard of 50 years on, and that would help complete the picture of what life in ancient Rome was like, what life in the period overall was like, just all of these things, and it is one of those great tragedies. But there is a second library, I believe it's called the Serapion. I'm too lazy to look it up right now. But it is a second library that basically is there to take spillover from the main great library, and it acts as a public library. And so Helena spends, not sort of directly, but by the end of this book, that she's apparently carting back just like a boatload of scrolls. They don't have books, they have scrolls, but, in practical terms, she's just, got a barrow full of books that she's hauling back to the library because she's been taking everything out because she can read everything, and it's great! I mean, I can't even imagine, that sounds so fantastic, to, go on a vacation where you get to see a few important buildings, and then they give you free access to a library with, everything. That sounds kind of super awesome. Anyways, so, yeah, I haven't even talked about the bulk of the plot, because the bulk of the plot is they invite the director of the library over. Falco he's staying with his uncle Fulvius, who is gay and weird and involved in a bunch of shady things with Falco's father, and it's a lot of not good. But anyways, Fulvius has invited over the director of the Great Library of Alexandria, and he's found dead the next morning, and so there's a murder investigation, and because Falco is the man from Rome with the ear of Emperor Vespasian, he sort of gets voluntold to solve the crime by basically everybody standing around. They're just sort of like, hey, you're gonna fix this. And he's like, I am? Yes, you are. And so he goes and investigates. And he finds everything is a hotbed of politics, which is not a surprise because Alexandria, Egypt, has always been a hotbed of politics and would have gotten worse, as described in this book, once it was taken over by Rome, which had a complicated political relationship with Egypt, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so he finds a hotbed of politics and people trying to bribe him, and the elder of his two brother-in-laws has decided to trek out there because, for whatever reason, Aulus has decided that he desperately wants to finish his study of law in Egypt, which his parents are kind of going along with because, well, at least he's sort of doing something with himself instead of just loitering around and pretending that he's investigating crimes with Falco. His mother-in-law continues to disapprove of him, but I think she has come to disapprove of him less by virtue of the fact that she doesn't really have any choice. He's clearly become a fixture. Poor Julia. But anyways, the two of them have decided that their eldest son, at least he's going to university, so they'll just let him get on with it. So he's loitering around and helping Falco try to solve this mystery, and, you know, various people get murdered, and it turns out by the end that the initial murder was actually a suicide, and, like, just there's a whole thing. I think that the ending feels a little like the resolution of finding out the person who was behind a particular killing. That felt a little artificial to me, a little tacked on, a little too last-minute discovery, which is a pity, but, yeah. Anyway, so they go trekking home, and at the very end of the book, they get a letter sort of filling them in on various things, such as who was promoted in place of the director of the library who, had died at the start, and so on. And, yeah, so this is kind of a straightforward, it's a non-straightforward murder mystery, which is absolutely shot through by Falco basically being depressed and aggravated, because one of the big themes of this series is the ongoing bugbear of people who refuse to tell him things and just answer his questions, and far too much of the time it's because they think that they're being so much cleverer than that big dumb investigator or informer. Some of it is people who are trying to preserve their reputations, but some of it, to Falco at least, really, really feels like people who aren't telling him things because they think it's fun to hide things from him, and make themselves feel smug that he hasn't figured stuff out without the critical information that they could have given him. Which, it's kind of obnoxious. And there's a significant degree of that in this book. It's a theme that kind of goes up and down in the series. Sometimes there's a little bit more of it, and sometimes there's a little bit less of it. But this time, there was a lot of it that felt a lot like people less trying to preserve their reputations than that they just didn't want to cooperate. At least that's how it felt to me. I don't know. Anyhow, so this was a nice one. The politics were really incidental in this. It was more because of politics he got dragooned than anything else. Yeah. So I think that's everything I have to say, and I will see you all next week.